We've come so far with these three souls, my friends. From an abandoned house on a lonely hill, to a kitchen table set for three. From a backpack clutched in sleep, to a daughter on her knees beside her father's chair. And now, we arrive at the most tender chapter of all. This is my conclusion to my own take on Jack, Tien, and Uncle Phuong's story. Remember the cliffhanger? The trip to Uncle Phuong's hometown. The small piece of land waiting under the sky. And the surprise Jack and Tien had quietly been preparing. Well, here's what happened. The morning they left, Tien packed a basket with sticky rice, boiled chicken, fresh fruit, and a thermos of hot tea. Jack loaded the car with a small wooden box wrapped in red cloth. Uncle Phuong stood in the yard wearing the cleanest shirt he owned, his hair combed, his shoes polished, and in his hands a single white lotus from their pond, the first one to bloom. "For her," he said softly. "Your mother always loved white lotus." Tien took his hand. "Then let's bring her one home, Father." The drive took 3 hours, through rice fields and small bridges and villages where buffalo grazed by the road. Uncle Phuong sat in the front seat next to Jack. Tien sat in the back. And for most of the drive, nobody spoke. Because some moments don't need words. They just need the road, the radio playing softly, and the people you love beside you. What strikes me about this drive is how silent it was, and how full at the same time. 3 hours of quiet that wasn't empty. That's the kind of silence only a real family can hold. The kind where you don't need to fill the space, because the space itself is already full of love. Uncle Phuong hadn't traveled this road in over a decade, and this time he wasn't alone. When they finally arrived, Uncle Phuong sat very still in the passenger seat. He didn't open the door right away. Jack turned off the engine and waited. Tien reached forward from the back seat and squeezed her father's shoulder. "Take your time, Father," she whispered. Uncle Phuong nodded slowly. Then he opened the door and stepped out into the warm afternoon sun. The land was just as he remembered it. A small, rectangular plot, maybe 200 square meters, just like Jack had said, overgrown with wild grass. A crooked guava tree leaning to one side, the remains of an old stone wall along the back edge. And at the far end, 2 small graves, his parents, and next to them, the freshly tended grave of his late wife. Uncle Phuong walked toward them slowly, his shoes crunching on the dry grass, the white lotus held carefully in both hands. But here's what he didn't see at first, because his eyes were full of tears. Jack and Tien had been here 2 weeks ago, in secret. They had hired villagers to clean the entire plot, to trim the grass, to repair the stone wall, to plant new flowers along the borders, roses, marigolds, hibiscus in 3 colors. And in the middle, under the shade of the old guava tree, they had built something Uncle Phuong never expected to see. A small wooden bench, 2 seats, with a little stone table in front of it. And carved into the wood of the bench, in careful Vietnamese characters, were the words Noi Gia Jin Joan Tu, Father Oi Con You Father. A place where family comes home. Father, we love you. Uncle Phuong stopped walking. He stared. He read it once. He read it again. His hands began to shake so hard, the white lotus almost fell. Tien rushed forward and caught his arm. Jack came up on his other side. "You did this?" Uncle Phuong whispered. "You two did this for me?" "Yes, Father," Tien said. "We wanted you to have a place where you can sit with me. Whenever you miss her, whenever you need her. She'll be right here, and so will we." And what happens next is the moment we've all been waiting for, my friends, because Uncle Phuong still had something to say. something he had been carrying for over 20 years. Uncle Phuong placed the white lotus on his wife's grave. Then he sat down on that wooden bench Jack and Tien had built for him. He sat down slowly, like a man who finally trusted that the chair would hold him. Tien sat on one side. Jack sat on the other. 3 of them on a 2-person bench, squeezed together. But nobody minded, because some benches are made for 2 and some are made for love. And this one was made for love. For a long moment, Uncle Phuong just looked at his wife's grave, the white lotus glowing softly in the sun. The marigolds Jack and Tien had planted swaying in the breeze. Then he spoke, and his voice was steadier than it had been in years. "I never told you something, Tien," he said, "about your mother, about why I never came back here. I want to tell you now, while we're all together, because I don't want any more secrets between us. Not one. Ever again." Tien's eyes widened. "Father?" Uncle Phuong took a deep breath. "When your mother got sick, the doctors told me there was a medicine in the city that might help her. It was expensive, very expensive. I sold this land, the one we're sitting on right now, to pay for it. And then the medicine didn't work. She passed away anyway, and for years, I blamed myself. I thought, if I had been smarter, if I had found better doctors, if I had been a better husband, she would still be alive. I couldn't come back here because every time I looked at this empty land, I saw my own failure." He paused. He looked at his daughter, then at his son-in-law. "But the truth is, Jack, Tien, I didn't fail her. I loved her with everything I had. And that's all any of us can do. I'm 68 years old, and I'm just now learning that. Even if all of this had not happened, even if I had stayed in that abandoned house forever, I would still have loved you both the same. Not because I was trying to make up for losing her, but because you are the family I was meant to find." Tien broke. She just leaned forward and sobbed into her father's shoulder. Jack put his hand on Uncle Phuong's back and held it there. "Father," Jack said softly, "you didn't fail anyone. You raised a daughter who became the best wife in the world, and you taught her how to love. Look at what she built for you. Look at what she chose. That's your gift to her, and her gift back to you. Here is the truth that took Uncle Phuong 68 years to say out loud. That love is not measured in outcomes. It is measured in showing up. He couldn't save his wife, but he never stopped loving her. And that love became the soil where Tien grew strong enough to love him back. This is how grief becomes grace. Slowly, through saying it out loud." Uncle Phuong wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. He looked at the white lotus on his wife's grave, and he smiled. "You hear that, Em?" he said gently to the air. "Our daughter is married to a good man, and they're taking care of your old husband. So you can rest now. You can really rest. I'm not alone anymore." Then he turned to Jack and Tien. And he said the words that closed the door on every fear he had ever carried. "I'm not going back to that abandoned house, not even to say goodbye, not even to collect anything. Whatever I left there belonged to a man who didn't know he was loved. I am not him anymore. I am Father. I am yours, and you are mine, and that is what I am." He stood up from the bench. His shoulders were straight. His chin was high. He looked younger somehow, like the weight of 2 decades had finally lifted off his back. "Let's eat lunch here," he said. "Right here, where she can see us. Tien, pass me the rice. Jack, pour the tea. Today we have a picnic with me." So they did. They spread a cloth on the stone table. They ate sticky rice and boiled chicken and fresh papaya. They told stories. Uncle Phuong told them about the time his wife caught him smoking behind the guava tree and chased him with a broom. They laughed. Tien laughed so hard she almost choked on her rice. Jack reached over and patted her back, and Uncle Phuong watched them and shook his head in wonder. "This," he whispered, "this is what all of it was for." The drive home was different from the drive there. Uncle Phuong sat in the passenger seat again. But this time, he was talking, telling Jack about the rice he wanted to plant next season, asking Tien if they could buy 2 more chickens for the coop, wondering out loud if maybe they should expand the lotus pond, because 4 pots wasn't really enough, was it? Tien smiled and leaned her head against the window. Jack glanced at her in the rearview mirror and winked, and the late afternoon sun turned the rice fields outside into gold. The secrets were finally gone. All of them. The backpack, the abandoned house, the hidden land, the grief he had never spoken, the shame he had carried like a second skin. All of it had been laid down on that small piece of land under the guava tree. And what came home in the car that evening was just a father going back to his children with nothing left to hide. He was not afraid anymore. When they pulled into the farm, the lotus flowers in the pond had opened wider, pink and white and purple. The chickens were clucking softly in the coop he and Jack had built. The mango tree was dropping its first ripe fruit onto the grass, and the room with the blue curtains had a light on. Tien had left it on that morning, so when they came home, the house would already be waiting. "Welcome home, Father," she said, helping him out of the car. Uncle Phuong looked at the farm, at his daughter, at his son-in-law, and he smiled the way fathers smile when they finally believe their own happiness. "I am home," he said, "and that is enough." That night, the 3 of them sat on the front steps of the house, just the way Tien had imagined it would be one day. The sky was full of stars, the frogs were singing in the lotus pond, and somewhere in the dark, a night bird called softly from the bamboo grove. Uncle Phuong held a cup of warm tea. Tien leaned against his shoulder, the way she used to lean against her mother's shoulder when she was small. Jack sat 1 step below them, his elbows on his knees, his face calm in the moonlight. Nobody spoke for a long time. They just sat, together, in the kind of silence that isn't waiting for anything, the kind that is already full. This was the life, this specific, ordinary, complicated, beautiful thing. This is what all of it was for. And here is what their story taught me: that a family is not who you started with. A family is who chooses to stay when staying is hard. Jack chose Uncle Phuong. Tien chose Uncle Phuong. And finally, Uncle Phuong chose them right back. That's the secret. Love isn't something you fall into. It's something you decide every morning, again and again, until one day you realize you've built a home with it. On a warm evening in early summer, weeks after the trip to the hometown, the lotus pond was full of blooms. Uncle Phuong was bent over near the embankment, teaching Tien how to scoop the fallen leaves out with a long bamboo pole. Jack was inside the kitchen, frying fish for dinner. The smell drifted out through the open window and mixed with the sweetness of the lotus and the warm earth smell of the farm. "Father," Tien said, laughing as she splashed her father lightly with the bamboo pole. "You're going to fall in." "I am not going to fall in." "Then let me help you up the bank." She held out her hand. Uncle Phuong took it, not because he needed to, but because he could. Because she was his daughter, and he was her father. And on this farm, under this sky, with this man cooking dinner in the kitchen, holding her hand was simply what fathers and daughters did. He climbed up the bank. He looked at her, and he said very simply, I love you, con guy." "I love you too, father," Jack called from the doorway. "Dinner is ready. Come eat before the fish gets cold." And the three of them walked into the warm yellow light of the kitchen, side by side, the way a family walks home. And that was enough. That was more than enough. This was my own take on their story, my friends. What I felt they deserved, and what their journey meant to me. Whether life unfolds this way, or another, what matters is the truth at the heart of it. That love and family are worth everything. That older parents deserve to be claimed out loud. That kindness, given freely, always finds its way home. Thank you for walking this journey with me. Be well, be loved, and go hug the people you call family tonight.